Walker. In my previous letter I wrote about the importance of habits, and I mentioned a few: a willingness to fail, a willingness to begin again, that are essential to resilience. Today I'm writing about the single most important habit to build if you want to be resilient, the habit of taking responsibility for your life. There is no easy formula for predicting someone's resilience. Sometimes the people we most expect to grow through hardship snap under pressure instead. And sometimes the people we most expect to crack surprise us with their strength. But I do believe that there is one question that can tell you more than any other about people's capacity for resilience. Ask them, what are you responsible for? The most responsibility people take, the more resilient they are likely to be. The less responsibility people take, for their actions, for their lives, for their happiness, the more likely it is that life will crush them. At the root of resilience is the willingness to take responsibility for results. Walker, you know perhaps more than most that life can do cruel things to people. Life is unfair. You are not responsible for everything that happens to you. You are responsible for how you react to everything that happens to you. That's something I saw in the refugee camps. Thousands of men, women, and children were in the same miserable situation, uprooted from their homes, torn from their lives. Yet while some were beaten down by the misery around them, others stood proud. Some were withdrawn and some were engaged, some sat in their trailers all day and smoked, others found children to teach, sports to organize, clothes to mend. Even at their most powerless, some found that they had a power that events could not steal from them. The first word out of the mouth of the complainer is almost always they. They were unfair. They didn't. They wouldn't. They can't. They distracts from they suggests that someone else is in control. On the other hand, as soon as we say I am responsible for, we take control of something. Earlier, I told you about the Navy pilot James Stockdale. Stockdale was an ardent student of Stoicism, and when he ejected from his stricken plane over Vietnam in 1965, he had a moment to reflect as he parachuted into enemy hands and what would become punishing years of captivity. I'm leaving the world of technology, he recalled telling himself, and entering the world of Epictetus. Stockdale was right. He was entering a world in which he would suffer more in 7 years than most people would suffer in 7 lifetimes. And as he drifted toward that suffering, he thought of Epictetus, and of all the ancient wisdom about resilience the Stoic could offer. Epictetus was born a slave and crippled at a young age, possibly as a result of a severe beating from a cruel master. The story goes that when the master went to work on his leg, Epictetus said, in the most matter-of-fact way, "You're going to break it." And when the leg finally snapped, instead of screaming in pain, he simply said, "Didn't I tell you that you'd break it?" This sounds like a Washington chopping down the cherry tree tall tale to me. But the reason why people told that story about Epictetus was that it was symbolic of his philosophy. Even in the face of master who delighted in cruelty, Epictetus maintained mastery of himself. Epictetus lived what he taught. After he was freed, he went on to become one of Rome's greatest philosophers. We live in an uncertain and hostile world, he told his students, but we alone are responsible for our happiness, because each of us is free to choose and judge. Whatever the world sends us, we have power over our intentions and our attitudes. Epictetus said that it is not things which trouble us, but the judgments we bring to bear upon things. That doesn't mean we sugarcoat things. That doesn't mean that we put on a big, fake smile and pretend that it's great that our legs are broken. It just means that a lot of our suffering, or, as Epictetus believed, all of it, comes from our minds, from the way we turn things over and over, the way we worry, the way we fear things that haven't happened yet. Try to look at things as they actually are in this moment, stripped of fear and worry, and you're likely to find that you can better bear your pain. Like Epictetus, Stockdale sustained a severely broken leg. He suffered regular beatings, imprisonment in leg irons, and solitary confinement in a cell 3 feet wide. But in a world in which virtually everything had been taken out of his power, he followed Epictetus's guidance and found ways to exercise responsibility. He kept his fellow prisoners organized and disciplined, he refused to offer intelligence to his captors. Even under torture. Throughout his ordeal, Stockdale maintained that he held more power over his suffering than his captors did. His ordeal would only become an evil if he let it. "I never lost faith in the end of the story," he said, "that I would prevail in the end and turn the experience into the defining event of my life, which, in retrospect, I would not trade." Stockdale refused to relinquish responsibility for his own thoughts and intentions. Few of us will suffer the way James Stockdale did. Yet all of us are likely to find, as Stockdale did, that acceptance of responsibility is a powerful cure for pain. Even when seemingly powerless, the resilient person finds a way to grab hold of something, no matter how small at first, to be responsible for. Taking responsibility requires courage, because the person who takes responsibility is very likely to feel fear. A good teacher will not only want his students to succeed, he will fear that he might fail them. A good doctor will not only want her surgery to succeed, she will fear that she might fail. If you take responsibility for anything in your life, know that you'll feel fear. That fear will manifest itself in many ways: fear of embarrassment, fear of failure, fear of hurt. Such fears are entirely natural and healthy, and you should recognize them as proof that you've chosen work worth doing. Every worthy challenge will inspire some fear. A lot of the doctors of a lot of the veterans I know are pushing pills to help reduce anxiety. I don't doubt that they help sometimes, but too often the pills come with no demands that someone change his or her life, and so you end up with a prescription shortcut to nothing but more and more medication. You also end up with the false ideal that the good life is anxiety-free. Yet if you come across a person or a team without fear, without anxiety, there is a good chance that you've run into ignorance or apathy. You've run into someone who doesn't know enough or care enough to be afraid. Neither is good. Fear is a core emotion. A life without fear is an unhealthy life. If you take your kids to the creek to swim, you'll have a lot of fun, but you'll also be on alert. That's good. That's proper. Fear is fine. You need it. If someone came to you at the creek and offered you a pill so that you won't worry as much about your kids, you tell them to shove the pill. Proper fear is part of the package of responsible, adult living. Today, too many doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, and well-intentioned do-gooders want to reduce anxiety or eliminate fear from decision-making. They've got it backward. Focus not on wiping out your anxiety, but on directing your anxiety to worthy ends. Focus not on reducing your fear, but on building your courage, because, as you take more and more responsibility for your life, you'll need more and more courage. Remember the two horses of the emotions we talked about, Walker? Fear is a motivator. It can propel you. You know this. Anyone who's been through BUD/S knows it. Remember how the threat of being in the goon squad could make you run fast. They'd make us run for miles, over the sand berm, down the beach, back again. After a few miles, an instructor would plant himself on the course of the run, raise his arm over his head, and let it hang there like some kind of guillotine. If you made it past before he dropped his arm, you were fine, but if his arm dropped before you reached him, you were in the goon squad. We did not want to be in the goon squad. While the rest of the class jogged in a circle, the goon squad would do firemen's carry drills up and down the beach, squats, push-ups in the sand. They'd crab crawl up and over the sand berm and back again. I remember one run when I was feeling weak and dehydrated, and I was farther behind where I would have otherwise been. I wanted to be a leader, I wanted to be a top-of-the-pack trainee. I wanted to be a guy who pushed himself. None of those thoughts helped. I was smashed, but then one of the instructors mentioned the goon squad and I really started to run hard. I passed one guy, 2, 3. I remember thinking, fear works. Fear can make human beings do amazing things. Fear can help you to see your world clearly in a way that you never have before. Fear becomes destructive when it drives us to do things that are unwise or unhelpful. Fear becomes destructive when it begins to cloud our vision. But like most emotions, fear is destructive only when it runs wild. Embrace the fear that comes from accepting responsibility, and use it to propel yourself to become the person you choose to be. While fear can often be our friend, excuses are almost always your enemy. Faced with a choice between hard action and easy excuses, people often choose the excuse. You know this. I know this. We see people do it all the time. But why? Why are excuses so powerful? Eric Hoffer said this: there are many who find a good alibi far more attractive than an achievement. For an achievement does not settle anything permanently. We still have to prove our worth anew each day. We have to prove that we are as good today as we were yesterday. But when we have a valid alibi for not achieving anything, we are faced, so to speak, for life. Excellence is beautiful and, like all beautiful things, temporary. One moment we are victorious. The next moment we were victorious. An excuse, however, endures. An excuse promises permanence. Excellence is difficult. An excuse is seductive. It promises to end hardship, failure, and embarrassment. Excellence requires pain. An excuse promises that you'll be pain-free. You look at it like that, and you begin to see why excuses are so seductive. How do excuses take hold? An excuse starts as a protective measure. It shields us from pain, saves our pride, keeps our ego from being punctured, allows us to obscure the brutal truth. That feels like a relief at first. We avoided the pain. Then we lay another excuse on top of the first. Then another. Excuses make us feel safe. So, we think, why not add another? Soon enough, you're wearing excuses like a knight wearing armor. Well, what's the harm in that? You're a strong guy, Walker, but how fast do you think you'd be able to run wearing a suit of armor? How well could you climb a mountain? How well could you swim across a lake? How well could you hug your kids? Excuses protect you, but they exact a heavy cost. You can't live a full life while you wear them. You can take away someone's house. You can take their food, their money. You can take their clothes, their freedom, even their children. But you can't take away someone else's excuse. We give up our excuses ourselves, or not at all. And here's what's really difficult about excuses. You're the only one who can let them go, but other people offer them to you all the time. Excuses don't just tempt those who make them, they tempt those who hear them. Sometimes the world can't wait to give you an excuse. Why? Because an excuse often frees everyone from responsibility. If you grab an excuse, it can almost look generous. It can look as if you're giving not just yourself but everyone around you a break, and that makes it even more tempting. A few weeks ago, I was talking with a group of 80-some veterans in St. Louis who'd flown in from around the country. They were enlisted and officer, soldier and sailor, Marine and airman. Many had been in combat. Most had been diagnosed with a disability. I told them that one of the greatest dangers facing a veteran coming home is an onslaught of misdirected sympathy. That's partly because, along with gratitude, the veteran is offered a raft of excuses. The world says, because of your injury or your stress, or the friends you lost, you don't have to. Be there for your family. Show up for work on time. Treat your friends well. Serve anymore. Excuses are usually offered with the best intentions. People want to be kind to those who are suffering. People want to reach out and do what they can, even when what they choose to do is worse than nothing. They offer you an excuse because they don't want to add to your suffering. Or maybe they want to connect and don't know how. Maybe they want to express thanks, and think that letting you off the hook is a way to do that. That happens more and more in a country in which soldiers and civilians are increasingly strangers to one another. It comes from a place of kindness. But it's kind poison. Don't drink it. People who think you weak will offer you an excuse. People who respect you will offer you a challenge. It's easy to say that no one else understands. It's easy to imagine that, because you're a unique person, your pain is unique too. And it's easy to become isolated in your pain. That, too, is fuel for excuses. You imagine that your pain is so special that no one can grasp it. Your excuse so unique that no one can challenge it. It's true that no one else has received your injuries. Yet every person shares with every other person an ocean of common experience. Love, fear, longing for life, dread of death, desire for affection, achievement, meaning, and friendship, all of these and more are universal. In your flesh and blood community, and in the larger community of history and literature, all of these things surround you. Losing a friend in battle bears a likeness to losing a friend to cancer. And though the former is rarer than the latter, they share much in common. So there is a simple truth to tell those who cling to the excuse that no one understands your pain is real, but it is not unique. Having been injured often provides an odd kind of comfort. It allows people the chance to hang out where they have been hurt. The hurt becomes a permanent excuse. I can't fill in the blank, because I've been hurt. I did this a lot after I got divorced. Loving a person fully means taking risks. It means opening yourself to her love. It means being vulnerable in your weakness. Sharing your imperfections. I was hurt and ashamed and scared. I didn't want to get run over by a train again. I found that, being divorced, I had a ready excuse to avoid anything painful. I'd say, I don't want to go through that again, and people around me, loving people, would let me off the hook, even though finding someone to love and live with is the surest way to real happiness in life. A broken bone takes longer to heal than a sprained ankle. The loss of a marriage takes longer to heal than the end of a promising fling. And just as you can't run on a broken leg, you shouldn't jump right back into trying to build a life of love after divorce. But there comes a time when enough is enough. All of these injuries have a hard truth in common. In the long term, the obstacle that stands between us and healing is often not the injury we have received, but ourselves, our decision to keep the injury alive and open long after it should have become a hard-won scar. It is not things which trouble us, but the judgments we bring to bear upon things. Sadly, our approach to struggling veterans often encourages them to hang out in hurt. Men and women who once demonstrate remarkable resilience, who padded through trials unthinkable to most, are suddenly allowed to play the victim. The struggling veteran's trauma is often genuine. The fear of crowds and loud noises, dreams of your battle buddies in distress, reaching under the bed for the gun in the middle of the bite, these are all real and hard. They are also beatable. In truth, it's not the trauma that's most harmful. The harm comes when we make trauma an excuse to avoid the activities, the relationships, and the purpose that are its only lasting cure. Diabolos is the ancient Greek word for devil. The literal translation is one who throws an obstacle in the path. It's often easier to imagine that a guy with horns and a pitchfork has harmed us than to realize how we have harmed ourselves. Yet we are usually our own worst enemy. We throw obstacles in our own path. If we had an external enemy who consistently forced us to make bad choices, to engage in self-destructive behavior, to be less than we are capable of, we'd declare war. Why should we act any differently when the enemy is inside? You have to master the one who throws obstacles in your way. Master yourself. Over the long term, you are responsible for your happiness. I don't say this to blame you for how you feel. I say it because in taking responsibility you will find freedom and power.